President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are wrapping up a joint meeting in Finland. Here's a live look at Helsinki, where the two leaders just held a joint news conference moments ago. It comes after the president's one-on-one summit. And before they took the podium in that news conference, security dragged a man out of the room with a sign that read "Nuclear Ban Treaty." You can see security struggling with that man before having to escort him out. President Trump and President Putin then took the podium minutes later. Putin said in their closed meeting, President Trump brought up Russian interference in the 2016 election. President Trump says Putin strongly denied the claims.
I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer. Okay, thank you.
President Trump went on to say he doesn't see any reason why Russia would interfere in the 2016 election. This was the second joint news conference the two world leaders held today. NBC's Jay Gray is in Helsinki with a look at what happened inside and outside of that summit.
President Trump one-on-one with Russian President Vladimir Putin for more than 2 hours.
I think it's a good start. Very, very good start for everybody.
That start with only the leaders and their translators in the room, lasting longer than expected before extending to include advisors during a working lunch.
Most importantly, we have a lot of good things to talk about and things to talk about. We have discussions on everything from trade to military to missiles to nuclear to China.
As talks continued inside, outside, protests, dozens gathering but kept far from the presidential palace as the historic summit unfolds. Jay Gray, NBC News, Helsinki.
And of course, we will keep you updated on developments from the summit and changes in relations between the U.S. and Russia right here on WBIR and at WBIR.com.